we're going to do a little example now of tidying up some Ruby code by running a static linter called rubocop over it. Rubocop will show you programming design that isn't great, it will show you syntax that could be improved, and use of non-idiomatic parts of the code. So to start with, I'm going to pull one of my tiny bits of code from GitHub. Then we're going to see which versions of Ruby we have available, so we can run the tests under something that's vaguely modern. So we have a fair selection on that. I'm going to base my tests on the same version that I currently test with Travis, which is 2.5.0. So we use RBM local 250, and that changes the Ruby that we're running under to be this version here. We're going to create a new branch in Git so we can keep our code changes separate, so when we push them up we can review them easily. Rubocop fixes. And to start with, we're going to run the unit tests before we get any further, just to make sure that everything's actually working before we start. So we install the dependent gems. These are listed inside gem spec file. And then we're going to run bundle exec make spec. And our tests are okay. So the test format's actually a little bit boring, so we're going to change that to show slightly more information. That will change us from some dots to actually having some useful information when they run the tests. CI systems don't really need it, but it's useful for longer term reports. So now we have that. Let's see exactly how bad Rubocop thinks we are. So we're going to run the Rubocop binary under the context of the current gem set and version, and that returns 22 offences, which is not great, but it's not the worst I've seen. So we'll start off by turning on the new cops that we're showing there. These are things that have been released recently, and we don't have any config regarding them either way. So all cops. Hopefully the clicking of the keyboard is not too bad for people listening. So if we run that now, we see that the new cop warnings have gone away, which is an improvement. So the first thing we're going to fix is the missing frozen string literal. This is something that impacts newer versions of Ruby, but we don't care about because we're still on version 2 at the time of recording, and probably for quite a while afterwards. So that will be a style fix. Style frozen. Literal comment, wasn't it? Then we'll disable that. And run that again. Then we drop our number of issues down to 16, which is good. So let's start picking these off file by file. Here you can see the file name where the problem has been detected, the line number, the character number, and the issue is found. So let's find something small to start off with. The gem spec file itself. So we have unsorted import dependencies. Those should be a very quick fix in Vim. So let's grab this file. And dependency wise, so rake, for example, comes after our spec, which is alphabetically not happy. And rubocop is very good at picking up on those little details. So we'll just sort all of the provided inputs. That's okay there. And then if we run bundle exec rubocop on that, that one file name, we now only have a single entry in there that's not correct, and that entry is we're using a here doc with a very short description, which is true. So instead of just having EOF or end of text or end of field, we instead change that to be something more meaningful, such as description. Makes the code a little bit cleaner, becomes a little bit more explicit what we're doing, and more importantly, it makes that go green. So let's rerun the rubocop again, pick our next thing to fix. Actually, what we will do is we'll commit that change in so you can see how the Git side works. So we have a diff of what we've changed, which is just the here doc and the dependency ordering, and then we'll give it an incredibly informative commit message. And that change is now in. locally anyway, we haven't pushed it yet. So next thing we need to fix is a file name issue. Yes, that is a terrible name because it repeats the puppet lint part in the test name, which we do not need. And that doesn't require us to change the actual code. We can just do git move and take away the redundant part in the next side. So if we do that, and then we rerun the specs to make sure that we haven't broken anything when we change the test name, everything still seems okay. Git st, which is an alias that I use, which is short for git status, shows us the current change is that we've renamed this file, and in the new side there is no puppet lint part. So we don't have to specify the file when we commit this because it is just it will be picked up as things staged to be done. Rename file to remove unneeded section, and that's gone. Then we run rubocop again, and we'll start on the spec file itself. So we currently have a couple of warnings. Block's too large, and we have a bad here doc name again. So let's have a look at the code on this. So the describe function begins on line 3, and we use describe to group all of the tests we're running. So that is going to be a larger block of code, so that's not going to be an easy fix. So rather than refactor all this out now, we're going to add the rubocop override to the config file, which will allow it to go. So if we go into this, and that was a metrics block length. So these are not in alphabetical order because I'm not that good with the memory. Metrics block. So we'll set that to be a little bit longer than usual because I don't have much time to tidy my code up. So we're a little bit more accepting than you would be in a production environment, and we'll exclude methods, just the one individual method for now, which is describe. Everything else we have in this code base should be a lot smaller than that. Is it methods? It's a plural, isn't it? It's methods. And then you can pass an array of those in, and we'll specify describe. And then when we run rubocop again, you'll notice that line has gone. The warning has been suppressed. So the only thing we need to fix now are the here docs naming values, which we can do quite easily. And we'll change that from just end of string to test class to make it more relevant. And then we run rubocop once more on that file. It's one of those things where you end up going so far back in history it would be quicker to type the file. But there are no more warnings in that file. So we can see the changes we've made, which are to fix up the here doc, and the other one inside the rubocop file, which we don't see in this, and we shall commit those changes. I like to keep the commits small so that it's a lot easier to revert back anything that's wrong and actually do the diff. If you can avoid your commits actually having more than one function in them, it's quite nice. So that is a rubocop fix up. The commit messages are not the most descriptive. Hopefully you do better than that when you're not panicking like this. So rubocop then says we have 9 offences in the main bulk of the script, which is where all the puppet lint check actually runs. So let's have a look at that. Line 2 is our first one. So in terms of empty lines, we've got line 2 and line 16. Let's go for those. Line 2. Okay, that is an empty line. And 16 is an empty line. I'm not entirely sure I like the density of that code, but adding the 2 lines isn't too bad. If we rerun rubocop, we'll see that we're 2 fixes down, which is good. Then we've got a number of use the new Ruby 1.9 hash syntax. So let's have a look at that now. Instead of using the arrows in this way, we'll just look at the code. Line 7. So instead of specifying it as a symbol on this side and using the arrows there, in more modern versions of Ruby, you actually change it to be that way around to reduce the syntax. It still creates them as symbols, but it's just less syntactically heavy. So that is the new Ruby hash syntax. And if we run that through, that drops us down to 4, which is good. So what do we have next? We have use next to skip iteration, which is on line 4. So this is actually a change in how the code works it's not a significant change, but it does reverse the meaning of everything underneath. Instead of looking for cron resources and then trigger warnings if we find them, we'll now say exit early unless it's a cron resource. And then we can reduce the indentation of the rest because it's no longer located inside a block. And we can take away the block closure because we're not in a block anymore. So we now say unless it's a cron resource, do this. It simplifies the default path. It's what we call an early return. So we do that and then check our rubocop again. Rubocop is happy with that. Oh no, it's very much not. I've got one too many ends in there still. So end, end, end. I have removed an end. Let's run the unit test again, and we have broken it. Unexpected input, expected keyword end. Oh, that wasn't in the original plan for today. We're going to revert that change out. So pull back the version of code we had before. Take out the 2 extra new lines and double check. So we're going to go back to a position that we know works. So I'm not quite sure how I managed to break that. So we turn these back into new style symbols again. That still works. And then we're going to commit our changes at that point so we can revert back to them if we need to. And we still see an issue with the hash key alignment. Right. See. Avoid comma after the last item of a hash. So I disagree with this warning. But if you ever do a diff, you end up adding an extra line in and a comma on the line above, which means the diff becomes 2 lines rather than the 1 line you've changed. So I'm going to add an exclusion for that because I don't like the style of it. And that's the style trailing comma in hash literal. And we're going to change the way this is done, and we're going to have in full style for multi-line is comma, I think. Full style for multi-line, one word. And if we run that, we see the number of offences drop again. And then we have the layout hash alignment. Align the keys of a hash literal if they span more than 1 line. So at the moment we have our hash keys lined up together. This rubocop is asking us to change them to look more like this, which I don't like. I'd rather keep them grouped as a table. So we're going to override that setting as well, which is hash layout. And layout hash alignment is enforced colon style. So if you ever find one of these errors, you can actually Google them quite easily, and there'll be a number of pages that show you how the code works and how you can override it in the config. Okay, so the only thing we have left now is the if statement that caused us the problem to start with. So we're going to add the changes we just made in the code itself. We haven't actually changed the code, so we don't need to do that at the moment. So the last rubocop error is the if statement, which is that one. We know where that is. So if resource type equals cron, we're going to reverse that and make it unless, which means we get rid of the end because we're no longer in a block. We can then remove the indentation for each of the lines underneath, and then when we run rubocop again, we broke it. I'm not entirely sure how that broke. I'm guessing there's going to be at least one person watching this screaming out exactly what the problem is. We have the right number of end statements. The condition is okay. I'm not entirely sure what's wrong with that. Just double check we're not accidentally doing something we're not supposed to. No, so that's okay. Right, so to end the stream for now, because my work day is about to begin, we'll reformat this back in and we'll be happy with fixing most of the issues, and we'll come back to this. So, other than that one issue that we still have remaining, we check that the specs still work. We check that rubocop is mostly happy, and then we see what we have left uncommitted. And the two things we have not committed are the rubocop config itself and the rspec config. So we have a look at those, and we're changing the format of the rspec to be documentation, and we're adding rules for some of the style changes that we want to make based upon the contents of the code. So we add rubocop defaults. As you get more productive with Git, you'll find that having commit messages that include the phrase "and" is probably a sign that you didn't group the side of your commits correctly. So this is not a great thing to do, but as this is an ad hoc thing on short time, it'll do for now. So we make the changes, we push those up to our GitHub repository, where all this code is available online. And for now, we'll call it quits. Thank you for your time and attention.